Hey everyone, welcome to this week's conversation with Dr. Stephen Nedd about the body and how to fix, protect, or maintain it using outside-the-box alternative solutions. If you're a big fan of the pharmaceutical or surgical approach, you are so in the wrong place, because on this podcast, we're not going to be pushing the conventional medicine methods or way of thinking about health. If you're looking for another way to live longer and healthier, join me, Ron Nedd, and my brother Dr. Stephen Nedd for this week's body chat about artificial sweeteners. Me? I'm a retired Twin Cities chiropractor currently helping people buy and sell homes in the Tampa Bay and Los Angeles areas. My brother has a thriving chiropractic practice in the Clearwater area of Tampa Bay, Florida. In this podcast, we're going to chat about all sorts of topics related to health, nutrition, exercise, just about everything having to do with the body. You're invited to listen in to our body chat, but don't forget that neither of us is giving you health advice, so don't rush off to do something without either checking with your doctor first or seeing Dr. Stephen Nedd as a patient at his office. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening, Ron.
Here we are talking about another sweet topic. So we're going to get into artificial sweeteners this week. We talked about sugar and the various forms of sugar, so now we're going to get into the artificial sweeteners, which some people do use, a lot of people don't use. Sometimes they find it in foods or drinks that they didn't know it was in. So let's give all the information so people can make their own decisions based on having all the information. So let's start with what's meant by an artificial sweetener, and why is it called that rather than a sugar substitute?
Well, an artificial sweetener is actually a type of sugar substitute that's produced synthetically, which means it's not produced by nature. It's not natural.
Okay.
And so the various types of sugar substitutes, there's actually 4 altogether, including both natural and artificial.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll just list them. Of course, there's the artificial sweeteners, which we're going to be primarily covering in this episode.
Right.
Then you have sugar alcohols, the best of which is xylitol.
Isn't that the one that's in that gum where they have those really cheesy commercials where somebody smiles and their tooth like blinks or shines?
I think you're correct.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So xylitol is a sugar alcohol.
Mm-hmm. And then you have natural sweeteners like honey, maple syrup, and agave.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final category is dietary supplements such as stevia and lohan, which is also known as monk fruit.
Right. Now, what are the 3 most commonly found artificial sweeteners, and what color is associated with each one?
Okay, well, the most common one used in the world now is sucralose, which is yellow, and it's also known as Splenda.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's followed by aspartame, which is the blue packet, and it's also known as NutraSweet or Equal.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, there's saccharin, which is pink, and it's also known as Sweet and Low.
Okay, good. And the order that you gave them in are probably the most recently released one first and the oldest one, saccharin, last.
That's right.
All right. So when did artificial sweeteners first start getting used on a broad scale? And do you have any info about why that happened or who was behind it?
Yes. We're going to get into the bitter truth about all this stuff here.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Okay, well, first of all, saccharin was discovered in 1879 by accident. And by the way, you'll see that all of the artificial sweeteners were ironically discovered by accident. Yeah. So the way it goes, the story goes, is a chemist spilled chemicals all over his hands and didn't wash them thoroughly. So he noticed during his meal after work that his bread roll tasted incredibly sweet, and he deduced that it was due to the chemicals he was working with in his lab.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was in 1879. Now, here's a little piece of trivia. Saccharin was the first product manufactured and sold by what notorious chemical company?
Monsanto?
In 1901. That's correct. That was the first product that Monsanto ever produced.
That's an auspicious start.
I know. Yeah, we're going to get into more about them as we go on here. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So 6 years later, the head of the United States Department of Agriculture recommended banning it. But it just so happened that the president at the time, Teddy Roosevelt, was on a weight loss regimen, which included a dose of saccharin prescribed by his doctor.
Ah.
Yeah, so that didn't go over well. But 5 years later, in 1912, it was temporarily banned due to toxicity concerns.
Okay.
But then it was soon after allowed again during World War I because of sugar rations and was used from that point on.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But artificial sweeteners really began being used on a broad scale starting in the late 1950s into the 1960s when the first diet drink called Diet Right came out in 1958.
I remember that.
And that was followed by Tab in 1963.
It's that amazing that those started that far back.
I know.
So that was when they became popular, was because of the soft drinks?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, these drinks contained another popular artificial sweetener called cyclamate, along with saccharin, and it was a 10-to-1 ratio of cyclamate to saccharin in the recipe. And cyclamate was later banned by the FDA in 1969 because of research studies that showed that cyclamate caused cancer in laboratory rats and mice.
Not a good thing.
No. And it's interesting that within a week of that ban, a saccharin-based Sweeten Low appeared on the market.
Wow, that's pretty fast.
Yeah, well, because Sweeten Low at the time was also composed of a 10-to-1 ratio of cyclamate and saccharin, so that's when Sweeten Low became primarily composed of saccharin, and now it's synonymous with saccharin.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So then the other thing that happened was aspartame was also discovered by accident in a lab when a researcher in 1965 who was working on an anti-ulcer medication licked his fingers after spilling the drug on his hand.
It's one of those bright moves.
Mm-hmm. So here's the deal. It was approved for dry goods in 1981 and for carbonated beverages in 1983, but there's quite a backstory to this.
Okay, go ahead and give it to us.
Okay, good. So it was originally approved for dry goods in 1974, but an FDA scientist at the time discovered that there were serious shortcomings in all of the 15 long-term studies that the manufacturer, GD Searle, submitted for review.
Okay.
For example, some rats in the studies died, but were not autopsied after to determine the cause of death. And there was also evidence of brain tumors in the rats in several studies.
Mm-hmm.
So this caused the FDA to put the approval of aspartame on hold. And this is when it gets real interesting.
Okay, go ahead.
So the head of the FDA was replaced in 1981 when the transition team of the new president of the United States included Donald Rumsfeld, who also happened to be the CEO of GD Searle. And of course, he handpicked Arthur Hull Hayes Jr. as the new FDA head. And then Hayes then promptly approved aspartame for use in dry goods later that year, of course.
Okay.
In 1983, Hayes left his post at the FDA amid accusations that he was accepting corporate gifts for political favors.
Yeah, and things never change.
I know. But just before leaving office amidst the scandal, Hayes also approved the use of aspartame in beverages, of course. Oh, and guess who hired Hayes after he left as head of the FDA?
Monsanto.
Nope. Burson Marsteller, the PR firm for, you guessed it, GD Searle.
Oh, okay.
But there is a connection to Monsanto, and that is in 1985, Monsanto actually purchased GD Searle and the rights to NutraSweet.
Of course.
Yeah. And of course, Donald Rumsfeld reportedly received a $12 million bonus from GD Searle during this time. Yeah, I know. If his name sounds familiar, it's because he later on went on to become the Secretary of Defense under President George W. Bush.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting history.
I know. And speaking of Monsanto again, they brought us such other greats as Agent Orange during Vietnam, bovine growth hormone that's used in our cattle, and Roundup Ready GMO seeds, which are estimated to cover about 90% of the U.S. soybean crop and 70% of the U.S. corn and cotton production.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I know.
We could do a whole thing on Monsanto, but that's another one of those where I'd be expecting the guys in the black outfits to be rappelling down from the helicopters with shotguns outside my window, ready to stop the recording. So we may not do one on Monsanto.
Good idea.
Or we might. So there was one more. Was there any information on Splenda?
Oh, we'll get into that in a little bit.
Okay, good. We talked about saccharin, which is Sweeten Low, Now, what is it made of and why did it end up falling out of favor?
Well, saccharin is actually a white crystalline powder that's about 300 to 400 times sweeter than sugar. And it's derived from the chemical toluene.
Okay.
And toluene, by the way, is a toxic substance that's obtained primarily from coal tar and petroleum gasoline. It happens to be found in paint, paint thinner, and various household products like fingernail polish, adhesives, and multi-purpose cleaners.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And I actually learned about toluene way back when I read Hulda Clark's book, The Cure for All Diseases, in which she named toluene and xylene as common brain solvents associated with multiple sclerosis and Lou Gehrig's disease.
Brain solvents?
Yeah, it actually can cross the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain and cause a lot of damage.
Okay.
And I'll give you a story of a patient that I worked on. Back about 20 years ago, I had a girlfriend whose mother had multiple sclerosis. She came over from Italy in a wheelchair, and I got to work on her. I had read this book already, and one of the things that they always said to look for with multiple sclerosis is mercury in dental fillings.
Right.
Yeah, but she didn't really have a problem with that. But it was also, Dr. Clark also said that the person can have parasites and also exposure to these chemicals. And it was interesting because she used to do cleaning, and she remembered her symptoms began shortly after she was mixing some cleaning materials together, and there was this like cloud of smoke occurred. Yeah, so likely she was using toluene and possibly xylene. So anyway, I put her on a cleanse to help her liver detox chemicals and also for parasites. And before she left, she was able to walk again and didn't need a wheelchair at the airport on her way back to Italy.
That's really great.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So that's saccharin.
Yeah, and I have more information on that.
Okay.
So Sweeten Low was first introduced in 1957. And again, it was originally a mixture of cyclamate and saccharin in a 10-to-1 ratio, like we talked about earlier.
Right.
So in addition to being the first blend of artificial sweeteners, Sweeten Low was also the first artificial sweetening agent to be marketed in a powdered form. So it was,
really?
Yeah, so it was very similar to sugar in texture. And because of the concern over cyclamate and cancer after the 1969 studies in which it was banned, saccharin was finally tested for safety for the very first time, nearly 100 years after its introduction into the human diet.
Okay.
And of course, not surprisingly, studies in the 1970s linked saccharin to bladder cancer in laboratory rats, according to the National Cancer Institute.
Okay.
And so Congress ordered further study of it and passed a law in 1977 that mandated a warning label on it. I don't know if you remember that, but it did have a warning label for a while.
I remember.
Yeah. So later studies found that the cancer incidence in rats was irrelevant to humans, leading to a repeal of the labeling requirement in 2000. And then the FDA declared saccharin safe for consumption the following year.
Well, yeah. Okay.
So apparently the FDA's opinion is that if saccharin is not a major risk factor, but merely just a risk factor, the product should be available and the public deserves no warning. Kind of like their opinion of GMOs, where like maybe GMOs are just a risk factor, so they also don't need to have a label either.
It's nice that we don't get to know about what's being put in our food or artificial sweeteners or anything like that, so that we can make our own decisions because they know what's good for us.
I know. Ugh.
Those jerks.
I know. So today, Sweeten Low is actually a mixture of saccharin and dextrose. And if you remember in podcast episode 8 of the Sugar Blues, it's also known as corn sugar because it's made synthetically from starch, especially corn.
All right, so we've got an artificial sweetener that's a sugar substitute that's got corn sugar in it.
That's right.
Wow.
I know. So the reason they always add stuff to it is because it has a bitter or metallic aftertaste. And so that's why they always add other things to it. So,
that's because it's freaking chemicals.
I know. So even though it causes cancer in rats, it's derived from toluene, has a bitter aftertaste, and is not a natural food. It's actually probably the safest artificial sweetener on the market, at least according to Dr. Joseph Mercola. I mean, that's pretty sad, huh?
That's getting scary.
I know. So you'll see why when we get into the other ones.
All right. Well, let's get into the other ones. Let's
All
start
right.
with aspartame, which is known as NutraSweet or Equal. What is that made of, and what problems are associated with the use of it?
Oh boy, this is a juicy one too.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it's 160 to 200 times sweeter than sugar, and it's made up of two amino acids and methyl alcohol, which is also known as methanol or wood alcohol, which happens to be a deadly poison. Yeah, remember it was the poison that caused some Skid Row alcoholics to end up blind or dead back in the day.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. So each of the three ingredients can be very toxic to an individual, especially with long-term excessive use. So I wanted to go through each of them.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so the first amino acid is called aspartic acid.
Okay.
And it's also known as what's called an excitotoxin because it can get into the brain and excite or stimulate nerve cells to death.
That's very interesting. I don't think I've ever heard of that. So this type of amino acid can actually cause an overstimulation of the brain cells?
Yeah,
Wow.
I know.
I mean, although I have to say, when you first said excitotoxin, it sounded like something from X-Men. That sounds like the new villain in the X-Men series movie. All right, well, I'll let you continue. Sorry, so we've got this first amino acid, which is an excitotoxin that overstimulates the brain and causes death in brain cells.
Yeah. So some of the chronic illnesses that have been shown to be contributed to by long-term exposure of this amino acid includes Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, as well as memory loss, dementia, epilepsy, and Alzheimer's disease.
All brought to you by NutraSweet or Equal.
Yeah, and here's another thing. The glutamate is another excitotoxin amino acid that is the main ingredient in MSG. Monosodium glutamate.
Oh, yes, that's right. It's in aspartame?
No. It's another amino acid that's similar to aspartic acid. It's also considered an excitotoxin. And so it has similar brain damaging capability.
All right.
Yeah. Just thought I'd throw that in.
Okay, good. So now let's move on to amino acid number 2.
Yeah, and that one's called phenylalanine, which is actually normally found in the brain. But people with the genetic disorder called PKU cannot break down phenylalanine. So taking anything with this can lead to dangerous levels in the brain, which can be lethal to them. Yeah. And the excessive buildup of phenylalanine in the brain can also cause schizophrenia. It can also make you more susceptible to seizures and also decrease the levels of serotonin in the brain, making you more susceptible to depression.
Nice.
I know.
All right, that's a nice long list of things for NutraSweet or Equal.
Yeah.
So that's the second amino acid.
Yeah, and then there's methanol. Oh my goodness.
So this is like artificial sweetener dating game.
Right.
Bachelor number 1 was aspartic acid.
Mm-hmm.
Bachelor number 2 was
phenylalanine.
All right, so what's bachelor number 3?
Methanol.
Okay.
So methanol breaks down into formaldehyde, which is a deadly neurotoxin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, formaldehyde works great on dead people as an embalming agent, but should never be found in a living body.
Okay.
Well, so here's the things that methanol toxicity can cause in the body: headaches, ear buzzing, dizziness, vertigo. And something that I see from time to time in patients is numbness and shooting pains in the extremities that are just like for no apparent reason.
Wow.
Yeah, and especially vision problems too. I see that too. Yeah. It's also a known cancer-causing substance and can cause birth defects.
Wow. All right. Yeah. So none of those 3 bachelors should be taken out on a date by anyone.
Yeah. There's another byproduct of aspartame called DKP, and it's been implicated in the occurrence of brain tumors as well as uterine polyps and changes in blood cholesterol. So that's another problem with it.
All right. So practically any horrible, disfiguring, painful, or memory affecting disease that you can think of could be caused by aspartame.
Yeah. And believe it or not, aspartame accounts for over 75% of the adverse reactions to food additives that are reported to the FDA.
Wow.
Yeah, it's way up there. I highly recommend the article written by Dr. Joseph Mercola called Aspartame, by far the most dangerous substance added to most foods today.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to share a couple more patient stories with this one.
Absolutely.
So I had a patient who had chronic headaches, and we traced it to the time that she started drinking diet drinks.
Mm-hmm.
And once I told her to stop drinking that, the headaches completely went away, and then she messed up and drank another one, and it came back. So it was absolutely due to the NutraSweet.
Wow.
Yeah. I've also had a couple of patients that were misdiagnosed with multiple sclerosis when in fact they were using aspartame. When they stopped using it, all of their symptoms went away. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So aspartame sounds to be worse than saccharin, like you said.
It is.
So now let's see if this is a trifecta here, or if this is the worst villain of all. Let's take a look now at sucralose, which is known as Splenda.
Mm-hmm.
What info do you have on whether it's good or bad as a sugar substitute?
Well, this one's 600 times sweeter than sugar, and just like Sweeten Low, but unlike aspartame, it won't break down and lose its sweetness when it's heated or cooked.
Okay.
It was also discovered by accident when a foreign grad student misread his classroom instructions as tasting instead of testing. And so he sampled the chemical he was experimenting on and found it to be sweet.
Where do they find these people?
I know.
I won't even go into it. Go ahead.
Okay. So sucralose is made in a lab in which 3 chlorine molecules are added to 1 sugar molecule. That's right. 3 parts chlorine and 1 part sugar. And that can't be good.
No. Because chlorine is not a safe chemical for people to be around.
No. And the type of chemical bond that the chlorine molecules have with the sugar is one of the major issues of sucralose, because it's an unnatural bond not found typically in any substance naturally occurring in nature.
Okay.
And so aside from Splenda, other examples of synthetic bound chlorine or chloride compounds include, and you'll love this list, remember DDT?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that was a notorious pesticide that was banned in the United States in 1973 after it was found to be killing off bees, fish, and other animals, especially birds like bald eagles and falcons.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's PCBs. These were used in hundreds of industrial and commercial applications until they were banned in 1979.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, Agent Orange.
Oh, it comes up again.
Yeah, I know. This herbicide was used in Vietnam by the United States from 1961 to 1971, and there was about 20 million gallons sprayed. And most of it was produced by Monsanto and Dow chemical companies.
Of course.
Mm-hmm. So the deal with this is the body actually has no enzymes to break down this type of chloride bond.
Okay.
And since it's not broken down and metabolized by your body, proponents for sucralose can claim it to be non-caloric. Essentially, it's supposed to pass right through you without any calories. However, the research, which is primarily from animal studies, shows that about 15% of sucralose is, in fact, absorbed into your digestive system and ultimately stored in your body.
Okay, so then what does that result in?
Well, here it is. There was a study published in 2008 that found that sucralose reduces the amount of beneficial bacteria in your intestines by 50%.
Not good.
Not good. And then some of the initial studies done on sucralose found that, 1, it decreased red blood cells, which is a sign of anemia, of course. It increased male infertility by interfering with sperm production and vitality. It enlarged and calcified kidneys.
Okay, the list is now starting to get worrisome.
Yep. Spontaneous abortions in nearly half of the rabbit population given sucralose, compared to 0 aborted pregnancies in the control group.
Wow.
And a 23% death rate in rabbits compared to a 6% death rate in the control group.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. So in other words, by using this, there's the potential of all these various different things, including spontaneous abortions and death. Okay.
And there was another study done recently in Italy in 2013 that found a link with sucralose to mice developing leukemia. Sucralose joins aspartame in this regard because the longest ever human aspartame study, which covered 22 years, found a clear association between aspartame consumption and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and leukemia in men.
Great.
I know.
Okay.
I mean, the list of problems just keeps going on and on with these artificial chemicals to no one's surprise. I mean, there are even numerous studies that show that artificial sweeteners actually increase weight gain and worsen insulin sensitivity to a greater degree than actually sugar does.
All right. So trying to get rid of sugar and drink diet sodas actually can cause the problems you were trying to avoid and worse things.
Exactly. They're kind of like drugs.
Yeah, that's right. Well,
Yeah.
they're chemicals, artificial chemicals, so they're not that far off from being drugs.
Yeah.
All right, good. So now if somebody's trying to avoid the calories of sugar or they're diabetic, what are some alternatives to sugar they can use that don't carry the risks found with using these artificial sweeteners?
Okay, great question. So first of all, I wouldn't recommend natural sweeteners such as honey, maple syrup, or agave.
Why?
Well, the reason for that is that they may seem like a healthier choice, but not only are they loaded with fructose, many are also highly processed.
Okay, but what about if somebody were to get, I mean, you can get honey that's just from a beekeeper, the local beekeeper that's from the local pollens and so on and so forth, which is supposed to be good for people with allergies. That wouldn't be as processed. Would that still be in that category?
That's true. And in this case, it doesn't matter if these things are organic or not. It's the amount of sugar content in them compared to table sugar.
Okay.
So here's the rundown. There's 12 grams of sugar in 1 tablespoon of table sugar.
Okay.
But there's 17 grams of sugar in 1 tablespoon of honey, 16 grams of sugar in 1 tablespoon of agave, and 14 grams of sugar in 1 tablespoon of maple syrup. So they all have more sugar in them than table sugar.
Okay, but then the possibility would be using those, but using less. Like instead of using a tablespoon of honey, maybe you use 2 teaspoons or 1 teaspoon of honey because it's sweeter.
Yeah, that would be totally fine.
Okay, so that's one way of approaching it.
Yeah.
And then what else do you have as far as approaches for that?
Well, in moderation, some sugar alcohols can be better than highly refined sugar, fructose, or artificial sweeteners. In particular, xylitol being the best.
Okay.
When it's pure, the potential side effects are minimal. And again, make sure you be careful around your dogs if you spill it, because it can be toxic to them.
Okay.
Now, the other sugar alcohol I'd like to talk about is erythritol, which is, I would consider it acceptable in small amounts. For example, it's found in the popular vitamin water drinks. And it's also added to stevia in the popular supplement called Truvia.
Right.
But I just want people to be cautious with it because consuming large amounts can lead to abdominal gas, diarrhea, and headaches because like all sugar alcohols, it's hard to digest.
All right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So as a matter of fact, your body only digests about half the amount of sugar alcohol contained in whatever you're consuming. So let's say it contains 10 grams, you only digest 5 grams. Yeah.
And the rest of it is going through your digestive system, and that's where you're getting the potential gas and cramping and diarrhea and all that.
That's right.
Now, what about xylitol? You have erythritol as another possible substitute, but you want people to use smaller amounts of that. Is the same true for xylitol?
Yeah, in moderation also, because it can also produce those types of effects.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Any other types of substitutes or alternatives that people can use?
Yes. The best of the best. First and foremost is stevia.
And it has nothing to do with it being named almost after you that it's the best one. It's because it's actually the best one.
That's right. It's 200 to 300 times sweeter than sugar, and it's available in a powdered or liquid form. It's perfectly safe for diabetics to use, and it has no calories unless, of course, it has processed sugar snuck in.
Yes, you definitely have to look at the ingredient label when you purchase it, because I had that happen one time with some that I had purchased somewhere, and it was a white, very fine powder, and when I looked at it, it had, I can't remember which one of the sugars that it had in it, but it did have a sugar in it.
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about. I'm going to go over that in a second.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So the trick to stevia is, like you just said, to carefully read the label to see what other ingredients are added to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the top stevia supplements sold that I rank best to worst are Sweet Leaf,
Mm-hmm.
Truvia,
Mm-hmm.
and stevia in the raw.
All right. So best is Sweet Leaf.
Sweet Leaf, yeah.
Okay.
And the reason is it's non-GMO, it has 0 carbs or calories, and it contains as its first ingredient the health-building fiber called inulin.
Right.
Yeah, which, as you recall, we went over this before. It goes through the digestive tract intact, the intestines, and acts as a prebiotic, which is food for the probiotics.
Mm.
And it's also a natural appetite suppressant.
That's great. So that's
Awesome.
another reason why that's really a good version of stevia.
It is. It's awesome.
Okay.
So second on the list would be Truvia, which is also non-GMO, also has 0 carbs or calories, and contains as its first ingredient the sugar alcohol erythritol, along with natural flavors. Now, the company that produces Truvia does not specify what natural flavors are added, so it is possible that it could be MSG. So I'm a little leery to recommend that one.
Okay.
Yeah. And then finally, stevia in the raw. So this has less than 0.5 grams of carbs or less than 2 calories of sugar per serving.
Mm-hmm.
And it contains as the first ingredient the unhealthy maltodextrin.
That was the one that I had.
So that's a type of sugar that's artificially produced from starches, especially corn. And like sugar, it has no nutrients and actually has a much higher glycemic index than table sugar, making it more stressful on the pancreas and liver to process.
So tell people again about glycemic index, because if they didn't listen to the earlier episode, they might not know what that means.
Yeah, so that's the speed in which sugar is processed in the bloodstream. Glucose, which is blood sugar, is rated at 100. And so you want things to be lower than that, okay?
Meaning that they're processed slower, meaning it takes longer?
Yes.
Okay.
So for example, table sugar is at 65.
Okay.
Which is actually better than blood sugar. But maltodextrin is actually higher than glucose at 105.
All right. So anything higher than the 100 means that it's going to be processed faster. And that's where you get the spikes in your blood sugar levels and the crashes and things like that.
That's right.
Okay. And it's harder on the pancreas too.
That's
because it has to produce insulin and it's putting more stress on it.
That's right.
All right. So glycemic index, people, that was a big thing with one of the big diet companies. And that's just saying that you get things that are going to take longer to break down into your bloodstream, into blood sugar, and have less stress on the pancreas. Mm-hmm. So then what you're saying is maltodextrin is something that's going to be more stressful on the pancreas because it goes and it gets metabolized or converted or broken down much faster than you want it to.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And by the way, going back to the color codes for sugar and sugar substitutes, stevia is in green packets. So choose green. And by the way, the second choice would be brown, which is sugar in the raw.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. So green or brown, and they won't let you down.
That's good.
Red, pink, or blue aren't good for you. So that's an easy way for people to remember. If you're out and you're going to have a cup of coffee at a diner in Sasquatch, Illinois or something like that, just remember red, pink, and blue aren't good for you, but green and brown won't let you down. All right. Thank you.
So the other dietary supplement I recommend is Lohan, also known as monk fruit.
Right.
And that's up to 300 times sweeter than sugar, is also less than a calorie, is grown in China and northern Thailand, and has no negative side effects, and is also safe for diabetics. And it can be found in liquid or powder form at health food stores or ordered online. And again, when buying this, make sure you closely read the label, especially the first ingredient. The In the Raw company, again, also makes monk fruit in the raw and uses, of all things, dextrose as the first ingredient.
Wow.
I know.
All right. Well, good. So those are some good possible alternatives. There's another one which we were talking about a little bit earlier, which I'm going to send you the information on, called It's Not Sugar, which Dr. Eric Berg has in some of his recipes for cookies and things like that, which is made of chicory root. Mm-hmm. So we'll look into that, and probably in a later episode, maybe the one we do on soft drinks, we can discuss that, because by then you'll have the information.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right. Now, before we end, is there anything else you'd like to say about this subject?
Yes, two things. One, I'd like to briefly cover the other artificial sweetener that's prevalent in our food supply and also has a sour reputation, pun intended.
Okay. What's that?
And that is acesulfame potassium, also known as acesulfame K or ACE K.
Never heard of it.
Yeah. So this is 200 times sweeter than sugar, and because of its bitter aftertaste, it's usually combined with other artificial sweeteners like sucralose or aspartame.
Mm-hmm.
And like the other big three artificial sweeteners, it was also discovered by accident from a German scientist in 1967, licking his fingers after spilling chemicals in the lab.
Okay.
ACE K contains the cancer-causing chemical methylene chloride. ACE K is also nicknamed the sweet devil, and of all of the artificial sweeteners out there, it has undergone the least scientific scrutiny, even though early studies in the 1970s showed a link to multiple cancer developments in lab animals.
Okay.
It was approved for use in dry foods and as a powder in 1988, and then for soft drinks by the FDA in 1998.
So what is it that people would see on a label if that's in there?
Any of the three that I mentioned.
Okay.
Acesulfame potassium, acesulfame K, or ACE K.
Okay.
So I'd recommend avoiding ACE K just like the other big three. There's no need to potentially increase your risk for various cancers when you've got these better sweetener alternatives that we just went over.
Very true.
Yeah.
All right. So go ahead. You've got one more?
Yes. So the big point I want to make is read the labels of everything you consume. I can't stress this enough. This includes not only products from the grocery store, but also from health food stores, and especially from companies that sell diet and weight loss products and supplements, especially network marketing and multi-level companies.
People probably never think to look at that.
No. So look for not only the big three artificial sweeteners, as well as ACE K, but also potential health destroyers like hydrogenated fats, canola oil, and MSG, which can be labeled as other things like natural flavors and autolyzed yeast extract.
Isn't that lovely?
I know.
All right, great. Thanks for all the research that you did and all the information and all that. I think that's very helpful. I hope everybody listens to this and shares it with people that they know that might be using artificial sweeteners or don't look at the labeling of the packages of things that they purchase to eat. So thanks for all the information on that, Steve.
You're welcome.
And next week, we're going to get into a very interesting topic, and we're going to be talking about inflammation, which is a hidden cause behind a lot of bad health conditions. So that's going to be our topic next week, and we'll talk to everybody then.
I'm looking forward to it.
Very good. Thanks again, Steve.
Thank you, Ron.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Body Chat Podcast. We both really appreciate your time and your attention. We want to provide you with interesting and informative episodes each week, and if you have a topic you'd like us to cover or any questions you'd like us to answer, send an email to us at info@bodychatpodcast.com. That's info@bodychatpodcast.com. To make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Body Chat Podcast now on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or Spotify. See you next week.